To everyone who you are and what you do.
Sure. My name is Javier Lopez. I'm currently an assistant commissioner at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene's division that's called the Center for Health Equity.
So tell us something about yourself that's unique or just shocking.
I'm having trouble.
I love it. Funny. I said it was going to be informal and it's working out.
It's so funny. Siri, chill out. It's not Alexis.
Siri is not part of this interview.
Something that's unique, I think, to myself is, I do have a master's in public administration. So working in the health department, not having a master's in public health and not being a doctor and being an assistant commissioner is unique in this space. Because a lot of the folks who are in similar positions have that type of background. But because, I've had a history of working in community organizing, with community organizers, I've done a lot of political work, I brought all those, touch points and, experiences to this position, which I think makes me uniquely qualified to really address, root causes of why public health inequities exist, because I've seen how people have organized in neighborhoods to address inequity. I've seen how politicians address inequity, and I'm trying to bring all those experiences together in this current position right now.
Okay, and I'm trying to bring everyone in on this discussion.
Yeah.
Like you said, the community addresses those issues separately,
Definitely.
And so does politicians, and
right.
So it's very important that we have a more together conversation to address the issues.
Yeah, it's a very separate conversation at times, and I'm hoping that in this space of government we can be a mediator between both of those worlds as best as possible. And health provides a lot of that opportunity because of the way that, research lends itself to advocacy and also lends itself to policy making.
Okay. So my very first question is, what is the role of the Bureau of Systematic and Partnership?
The Bureau of Systems Partnerships.
Systems Partnerships. Okay, sorry about that.
That's cool. It's cool. It's a weird name. So we are a bureau amongst 5 bureaus within the Center for Health Equity. So the division Center for Health Equity has 5 bureaus, and we're one of them. And our focus is really on trying to get to the root causes of a problem. So our portfolio of work includes food retail access. It includes anti-violence work. It includes diabetes prevention and community health worker initiatives, as well as faith-based work. And through every one of those units, my call to action to each of the leaders and the teams is like, hey, I don't want to just run a program that just is a program. I want to understand how we can put that program out of practice. We want to address and figure out the root causes that are creating the opportunity for that program to even exist, or that intervention to even exist. So we go a little bit further and deeper than probably a lot of groups are willing to go, because that's why I came here. I didn't come here to just do programs that are here today and gone tomorrow, and the problems still remain in neighborhoods that I care so deeply about.
Okay, so I'm glad you touched on that, because I've been doing a lot of interviewing in the community, and a lot of the people are saying, well, there's not access to nutritional foods in certain neighborhoods. Right. Does the Bureau recognize this as an issue, or is this just a myth?
So the Bureau does recognize this as an issue, because one of our initiatives is focused on food retail redesign. It's called the Shop Healthy Initiative, and that initiative centers on working with store owners to transform the stores to have healthier items available, as well as healthy drink options, as well as looking at marketing and advertisements that lifts up those healthier items in those stores. So we recognize it as a program. We have a program that is attached to doing that. And in many neighborhoods across New York City, there is still a major gap and problem in terms of access. And I want to say year-round access is probably the problem that is facing folks more now than 10 years ago. What I mean by that is now you have a lot more farmers markets, you have a lot more green carts in neighborhoods across the city that are black and brown that never had access, but those are seasonal. So what ends up happening is you may have access for certain pockets of time, and then those items go away. There's also gaps and opportunities for a lot of the urban agricultural leaders in the city who are growing produce, who are growing healthy items. You know, they need land opportunities, they need the opportunity to get their products out, and you know, I think there's been a slow movement to recognize that they're part of this battle to ensure that people have access to. So, you know, there's a seasonal problem. I think there's a problem in terms of like who's recognized as the ones who can provide access to healthier produce and healthier options in the community. And we need to do a better job of addressing those areas of concern that I think people still have. But I think we're in a better place across the city than maybe 10 to 15 years ago, where the whole concept of food deserts really became known and synonymous throughout the city.
So do you mind educating the public on some of the initiatives and policies that have been put forward to addressing issues such as food deserts, as you mentioned?
Yeah, so over the years, and I'm going to just give like kind of a summary of what the city has done and, you know, from my understanding, what other groups are doing and what we're trying to do. So the city, New York City, has done a lot of things probably since the Bloomberg administration to create more access points to produce. So they've had the expansion of farmers markets. They've had the introduction of health bucks for folks to, you know, basically have an incentive to go to the farmers market, and it's a monetary incentive. So for every, I forget how it goes, I think it's like $1 or $2 that you get on top of what you would pay that contributes to what you can overall buy at a farmer's market. So the expansion of farmers markets, the expansion of health bucks have really, you know, created the opportunities for people to go and shop for healthier items on a more regular basis, and that's become kind of normalized. It's a part of like what comes out of the city, what comes out of this agency, which is Health Bucks, and coming together, that's the way some of this access has been addressed. Additionally, there was a huge push for several years around supermarket expansion, and with supermarket expansion there was a carve-out that was called the Fresh Initiative, which allowed you know, new supermarkets to go into developments that from a zoning and urban, from a planning standpoint, the footprint would be a lot different. And because of those differences, there was a specific carve-out that if you are a supermarket and you wanted to establish yourself or to rehab your existing supermarket, you can get some incentives if you had a carve-out of a certain square footage for produce. And I don't know the specifics about it because it has to do with zoning and planning, but that was an initiative that was really, you know, kick-started, I want to say, over a decade ago, and I think a lot of supermarkets that are in certain black and brown neighborhoods took advantage of that. There's still a huge gap in terms of supermarkets in neighborhoods. A lot of it has to do with gentrification, rent, and people just getting pushed out, so that's a major problem when it comes to access. But the city has, you know, continuously tried to think through, you know, how they can take advantage of the changing landscape to take advantage of, you know, certain policies and programs that they can put in place. For us, in our bureau, like I said, we have the Shop Healthy initiative, and what I'm really interested in doing this calendar year is working more with community leaders, activists, food justice folks to really understand how we in government, we in the health department, can do a better job of being responsive and being supportive of what they're trying to lead. The Shop Healthy initiative goes back a long way. It goes back before I was here. I mean, I've only been here for 3 years, so Shop Healthy goes back over a decade. And the whole concept was, you know, if you create access in stores, people will come. And it's kind of a, you know, I respect the folks who designed it, because at that point in time, they probably thought that was the best way of addressing the issue, but there really is no connection to the neighborhoods and the leaders who are looking at food sovereignty and land sovereignty and food justice. So what I'm hoping to do this year is, you know, really have an accountability structure where we can talk to folks and say, is our program really doing anything that's helpful? Okay. You know, and same thing with the stall owners who are being displaced and pushed out. Like, what can we do to really maintain those small businesses in the neighborhood, as opposed to just saying, hey, here's some water, here's some fruit, and you're not really addressing everything that goes around that.
So this is off topic a little bit. I actually had no idea what Shop Healthy was,
Yeah,
or
yeah,
the
yeah.
Health Bucks, for example.
Right.
So who exactly was that program? Those programs designed for?
I think both programs, were designed for, folks who lacked the means, specifically with Health Bucks, to go to a farmer's market. Like, that was a huge call out, and I think a lot of the activists and food justice leaders were saying, farmers markets are expensive for a lot of people. And the city and the health department, and the state had heard that routinely for years, and when it came time to think about how do you create incentives for people to go to the farmers markets, especially if we're saying in neighborhoods predominantly of color where there's a lack of access, we want to get the farmers to those neighborhoods. Well, farmers got to make money, right? And people got to go there. So the whole concept of Health Bucks was really, a market opportunity, as well as answering to the calls that people were making about, hey, we're not going to be able to send people there. We're not going to be able to go there the way the current pricing structure is. So these incentives, are meeting that. And there's Health Bucks. I want to say there's Senior Bucks. When you combine that with folks who have EBT, that they can use their EBT card at some of these markets, it's really a good incentive opportunity for people to go and shop at these stores, at the markets. Yeah.
And just out of curiosity, are people utilizing these programs, especially the Health Bucks?
Yeah, they are. And you could say that they are because elected officials, some in the Bronx specifically, are using their discretionary funds to sponsor the Bucks. So when elected officials are like, coming in the game and saying, here's some money, it's usually because it's working out. And it's good because I think a lot of other elected officials are seeing that this type of investment in their community makes a lot of sense. The only downside is, as I said before, it's seasonal. So, a lot of people can stock up during the farmers market season, but then post the farmers market season, that type of incentive is not as applicable in the neighborhood.
There's this sort of boat in the Bronx, I believe. Yes, and so during the summer months they plant fruits and vegetables, I believe, and people in the community go out there and they receive those. So I wanted to take a look at it, and I went out there maybe fall.
Was it at Hunts Point?
Yes.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. That people have been talking about that and been doing that for a while.
Yeah. So I was just disappointed that during, like you said, it's seasonal. So during these colder months, those resources aren't there for people in the community. So.
I think that's the challenge is to normalize some of these programs and initiatives throughout the year. But at the same time, local urban agriculture opportunities with the seasons that exist in New York are still there as well. I mean, you can grow different produce during the seasons that we have in this state and in the city that requires probably a little bit more education about preparation and how people can utilize the things that are available during the off summer and spring months.
In regards to posters and any kind of educational information that you guys have put out there, where are these posters and where do you typically advertise them?
So for us, all of our posters related to food reside in stores. So the Shop Healthy program has posters that speak about fruits and vegetables and water, but they also have posters that are highlighting some of the specials that the stores have. So you'll get like $2.99 special, banana, half a sandwich, and a water. So they work to create demand through some of the posters that they have, but they're all pretty much predominantly placed in the stores themselves. Now the health department as an entity, when it comes to highlighting proper nutrition and how people stay away from certain sugary drinks and things like that. There's larger campaigns that you see in the subway, you see on the bus, you see on the internet, you see on TV, and we don't have that type of budget to do all that. But the health department is probably more synonymous to what people recognize as the type of advertisements that are being put forth to talking about like nutrition and things like that.
I would say where I live, the most effective way that I received that sort of information is on the subway, or anywhere subway related. That's where you see those posters, especially the sugary drinks posters. Those are like very good and very attention grabbing.
Yeah, they do a good job of really trying to capture, you know, the short attention spans that we all have.
Yes. Yeah.
And that the latest campaigns that have done that, I think, for a lot of people.
SNAP.
SNAP, yeah.
Also known as, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. Okay.
Yep.
So there's a lot of stigma about SNAP and food stamps. So do you mind, for the viewers, explaining who that program was designed for?
Yeah. The SNAP program was designed for folks that are, you know, experiencing extreme, or not extreme, bouts of poverty. You know, it's a program that is designed to ensure that, you know, nutrition is extended to families, predominantly families across the country. And, you know, it's been in existence, I forget for how many years, but I think over 25 years it's been in, and it's been used as a political football in a lot of spaces. I think it's race related, quite honestly. You know, I think people tend to think that those who are on SNAP are, you know, the welfare queen, black mom, and that's what allows these types of idiotic conversations to occur when you're talking about poverty. And this program is designed, just like public housing is designed, to help folks who have experienced poverty, and in like public housing, some safety net with individuals so they can live and thrive. And for nutrition, this is an opportunity for people to get access to food. And it's really simple. It is not something that should be this difficult for a majority of Americans to understand. I guarantee you, you know, there are family members and friends that they have relationships with that at some point have been a SNAP beneficiary. And if we simplify it and say, you know what, if you're a working mom or dad or grandmother that has, you know, multiple kids in the household and you can't feed them, I mean, this country is designed from Roosevelt to maybe not 45, but to Roosevelt through Obama. You know, there's always been leadership that tries to ensure that that safety net is preserved, and that is what SNAP really is all about. You know, you can get into the nuances about the Farm Bill and like how all that plays out into it, and I'm not as educated on that necessarily, because I would imagine a lot of the food justice folks who are really into that work can give you more of an idea of like how this impacts farmers. And you know, you have big ag versus little ag, and it gets very complex. But for me, for the work that I've historically done, SNAP is really geared to ensure that those who are experiencing financial hardships are able to buy food for themselves and their families.
I honestly don't know what has changed in SNAP over the last couple of years. I know there's been always a push to ensure that, you know, SNAP dollars and, you know, EBT is associated with purchasing quote-unquote healthy items, and there's been a lot of folks in the food justice world and the nutrition world that have advocated to have like a tracking mechanism, if you will. I am less inclined to get into the cupboards and cabinets of those who are in poverty. That's a personal opinion. It's not an opinion of New York City Health Department, because I don't know where we stand on that. So I think there are a lot of more education that is extended to families who are recipients of SNAP benefits to ensure that they're purchasing healthier items. You know, I think it's similar to like the WIC standards and trying to figure out a way to balance what people buy during the course of a month. But I personally am very against pushing people to buy only a select amount of items. You know, there's just a lot when you're in poverty that you have to take into consideration when you have family and kids, when you're trying to stretch out meals. You know, your produce tends to go bad relatively quickly. If you're in a household where, you know, you may not have the optimum refrigeration units that can ensure that the crisp lettuce stays crispy for the whole year, you're going to force them to buy that lettuce and those apples that go bad, and then they lose some of their benefits. So when you're dealing with poverty, you have to be really cognizant of all the factors that are impacting that person's day-to-day living. And to push people to buy only select items is unfair, and I think is another indication of folks trying to, you know, you know, the patriarchy is pretty real when it comes to, you know, government and it comes to nutrition sometimes, and we have to really be aware of that and know when to listen to what people are needing and figuring out how we can use that conversation as one of education.
Very important question, probably the most important that I've asked. Through this bureau,
Yeah.
What kind of programs are there that are available to people that do not qualify for federal and state aid?
This bureau doesn't, you know, work, and this agency in a lot of ways doesn't necessarily work to provide programs to folks that way. I think, and quite simply, like, our bureau doesn't work in that service type of delivery space. However, for the agency and for our colleagues that do a lot of service delivery work in neighborhoods, you know, we have access to a lot of different programs to ensure that families are, you know, moved to figure out like what they do qualify for and what access points are available. So I wish I had a better example of when faced with that, you know, what do we do? But structurally, we just don't function that way. So I don't have anything to give in terms of an example of like how that plays out. But there are a lot of programs across the city. There are a lot of emergency food programs across the city that I'm personally familiar with, that I volunteer for, that a lot of times families who are non-citizens and undocumented even, you know, I work to make sure that some of those emergency food places, they are connected to. So those who don't qualify for the programs because of a whole litany of reasons, I would just say that there are a lot of access points in this city to make sure that they have a meal in their system.
So for those of you who don't know, there's Green Cards, which is a program by your bureau?
By the health department.
By the health department,
yeah, not
okay.
our bureau, but the health department,
okay.
Yeah.
So how is it determined, maybe you don't know because it's not
Yeah.
here, how is it determined where these Green Cards are located?
Well, there was a big push when the Green Card program was established to look at the maps where there was, you know, acknowledgement by the health department that they're food deserts. So within those maps, a lot of the green cards that were being awarded, you know, they were given the opportunity to set up in those neighborhoods. And a lot of the access concerns that people had was, the goal was that these green cards would try to address them by being placed in neighborhoods that didn't have a supermarket, didn't even have a farmer's market, and that's kind of my simplistic way of describing like that process. But there's a whole application apparatus that the health department puts in place for folks to receive green card licenses, and I want to say now in 2018, a lot of it probably is more spread out across the city than when it was previously or originally established, when they were trying to just really address access. I can't imagine with the growth of the Green Card program that it's the same type of process now. It's probably a different process now.
So when I was reading about Green Cards, I didn't exactly know what they were. Is these cards that the vendors are on the side of the street?
Yeah, so what the green cards are is you would see like a platform, and you have multiple like vegetables and fruits stocked up. So I've been in New York my whole life, so there's always been a fruit and vegetable person. You know what I mean? It was really informal. Some of it was not formal, but, you know, given like vendor designation. So when the Green Cards program came up, I was like, there's always been kind of like these green market folks selling, but they became like a formal program. So when it became a formal program, it became much more ubiquitous across the city. Then when I was growing up, you would have like pockets of this person right here sells the good avocado, this person sells, you know, this type of product there, and you would kind of bounce around to the different vendors on the street, which still exists, but more or less it's more formalized to these green cards now. Okay. So the Shop Healthy program is a continuation of the Healthy Bodegas program that was a part of the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. It's over a decade. It's over a decade in terms of its overall existence. So the program's origin stemmed from folks who were really interested in creating healthier food retail environments in neighborhoods that, again, had poor access and opportunity to purchase healthy and affordable items. And I think the first wave of healthy bodegas was about getting like 1% milk into the stores, and then it became about water, and then it became about produce, and then it became what we call now Shop Healthy, which is a multifaceted program that works with stores and works with those who are big vendors or those that procure big bulks like a Krasdale and big entities that provide food across New York City, and then advertisements. So it's evolved from an initiative that was really focused on getting a couple items to how do you really address the food system in multiple ways. But as I said earlier, I think the program is at a place now where we have to check back in with leaders in the neighborhoods that are doing food justice work to see, are we being an ally to what they're leading? Are we being an obstructionist to what they're doing? Could we do a better job of partnering? I feel like the program is and has been in isolation a little too long, and it's about time to recognize that there are probably some good ideas out there that we could be supporting through the initiative, because we're government and we have, you know, the pulpit to, you know, convene and to bring people together differently, and our initiative hasn't done that in some time. So food access for food deserts was a big problem, and the food retail environment was non-existent. So when combined together, folks were like, you know, it's a desert. We have nowhere to go. We can only go to, you know, the bodega, or we can go to maybe the 99-cent store, but we couldn't really get, you know, what one would argue as a healthy meal or purchasing the items for a healthy meal. So there was a big push because of this language to say, let's address these food deserts. So you had programs like I described earlier, you know, expansion of farmers markets, green carts, the Fresh Supermarket Initiative, Health Bucks. You know, people were like, you know what, you got to invest in countering this reality of food deserts being in existence. And I think now a lot of folks who are in the food justice space, you know, I've heard a lot of people say this, they call the term like food swamps, where, you know, there's a lot of food, it's just bad food. You know what I mean? It's a lot of like, you know, food that was like candy and chips, and, you know, you got your, and this is not knocking any of these establishments, because a lot of them are like, some of them are immigrant-owned establishments, and they're just trying to get their foot in the door. But the items that they sell are not necessarily the best items for that neighborhood, right? And now you're in a place where, how do you work to create a consciousness in the food retail environment that are in those neighborhoods that as consumers, we don't want that. And when you get there, it becomes even more complicated, because, you know, the way in which you change demand is by having your money to do that. And if we're talking about the neighborhoods that were designated as food deserts or clay as food swamps, you look at the median income for those neighborhoods, the incentive for the stoner, which is monetary, to change the way that they operate may not necessarily be there. Which is why when neighborhoods are gentrifying and you see new types of people coming in, predominantly white, educated, you know, professionals, you see the stores change like that. So, you know, how can we, as government, work to, you know, adjust the way that we're trying to tackle this issue of food access by not relying solely on the market to dictate what happens next? Because if we do that, then we're just waiting for neighborhoods to gentrify, and then people get displaced and pushed out.
Excellent point.
So it's tough.
Yeah.
It's a challenge.
So when I travel to neighborhoods, whether it's for work or just to visit someone, whatever it might be, I always look for what those stores in those neighborhoods have to offer. So let's say I wanted to eat a mango or something like that, and I'm noticing that those items aren't there, and it's more so fatty foods and sugary foods that are available to those people that live in those neighborhoods. How do I begin the process of advocating for access to fruits and vegetables, let's say in a bodega or a supermarket that doesn't exist, or any kind of facility or store that doesn't have?
It's tough. I think the advocacy is there, right? People, food retail establishments move and change course depending on what the consumer is vying for or lobbying for, you know. And I think we in the health department, you know, the folks that have done this food work of, you know, they've held a lot of discussions with food retail establishments, you know, put the low sodium cans here and, you know, go with water here. But if folks aren't buying it, it becomes problematic for that store owner. And, you know, when you talk about culture, I reflect on the fact that if you go to a lot of Caribbean, Central South American countries, African countries, you know, eating healthy is there, you know, whether it be juicing, you know what I mean, whether it be just the diet. So I think there's a cultural conversation that we need to have with some of these immigrant store owners and folks that are like operating the businesses and saying, in your home country, you don't make these foods or you don't sell these foods. So what happens? Is it purely economic? Is it the perception of the American diet? Is it the lack of awareness of, like, you know what, people in this neighborhood who are like you come from a nation that juicing and vegetables are there and would be consumed? Like, maybe you can kickstart that again. So I feel like the conversations have to change too. It's all, you know, as government, I think we come in and say, oh, you know, you got to change your store model and you got to sell these items, but it's like the cultural conversations that are there to be had need to start occurring and maybe that can lend itself to a different way in which we address the concerns about the fatty foods being, you know, there. We will come to find out and say, hey, I can't afford to do this because I took out a loan at X amount of dollars and these sell and I make a high yield on this. You know, there's a business side of it that we don't necessarily understand from the advocacy space of coming into their space and saying change your model. So there's a lot to do differently that I would say that the opportunity is there.
So you kind of kept it real right there.
Yeah.
Does government keep it real in terms of these conversations that are being had?
It's a yes and no. I think, and you know, that's why I'm lucky to be in a space now to be a little bit more, you know, different in terms of like framing the discussion. I don't necessarily think government is allowed to have the honest conversations because we are always tied to political timelines. And you know, when you have goals that are centering on like, we want to touch these many individuals and we want to work with X amount of stores, the design of how to do that is sometimes avoiding the root cause of the issue. And because the root cause of the issue is like a 10-year discussion and you're not able to lift up outcomes and achievements quickly in that way. So I'm really, you know, hoping that the work that the Bureau that I'm part of, you know, we can continue to be given the space to present opportunities for this agency and potentially the city to like address these areas of concern or the root causes of why they exist and like at least have that and say, have a 10-year plan while simultaneously maybe doing this 2-year work, right? You can do both. It can be an and. You can get those political wins because we're part of government and the apparatus is connected to a politician, but you could also be able to say as an agency, you can have like a 10-year plan in addition to meeting the political expectations. And that's the opportunity I think we have here.
Okay. Long-term sustainability. So what does your Bureau have planned for in that regards?
Sustainability for the food retail work I think really stems, I'm going to hold my colleagues who do that work to listening to what folks who are in the justice spaces are looking for us to do. That creates sustainability. So the way that this whole apparatus of the health department operates is you get funding, and I think all city government probably operates this way. You get funding for X amount of time, and you lead an initiative or you lead a program. And if you silo yourself, and nobody from that neighborhood or the specific community you're working with know that you're working there, sustainability can never be achieved. So my goal with my colleagues is to work on every initiative to ensure that there's a connection back to the neighborhoods that they're serving. So there's information being shared, there's milestones being shared, so that if we're looking for long-term funding, that long-term funding can go out to those neighborhoods as opposed to coming to the health department to continue to execute some of the work that we've seen some progress on. Our work has to live with the communities and neighborhoods that we serve, in my opinion. We as government can be technical assistants and thought partners and leaders because we have expertise in certain areas that our colleagues in neighborhoods may not have the time to invest in. But if we're really thinking about long term, a lot of the funding and a lot of the work has to reside within the neighborhoods that we serve. And that's the goal that I have this calendar year, is to try to make sure that the work that my colleagues are leading are connected with people that want to continue to see that work happen in their neighborhoods.
Social media
Right.
and advocacy
Yep.
within the community.
Mm-hmm.
How do people begin to take part of the decision-making process in this discussion of advancing food equity?
Yeah, there's, in the city there's this thing called participatory budgeting that the New York City Council a lot of the New York City Council members create processes to see how they can invest their discretionary funds in their neighborhood. And I feel like that's a vehicle of untapped potential still for this conversation where, through the advocacy of certain organizations and groups can come in and say, if we had $50,000 to do X, it's going to have an impact in this neighborhood via Y, right? And that's funding. That's like seed funding to really start new ideas and explore new avenues to address food justice work differently, that I feel is right there for a lot of people to take full advantage of. From a social media standpoint, I think it's just continuing to document, the inequities that people see, whether it be the lack of stores, the lack of access year-round, the quality of the products, the price points, whatever hashtag that people can come up with locally or citywide that creates a level of consciousness that didn't exist before. We see it all the time, right? We're seeing it right now play out with multiple topical areas that I think we are in a good space where if someone like yourself or others were to start a movement via social media, it can catch on relatively quickly if it's something that people recognize in their day-to-day. If people recognize like, oh, this apple sucks, or this store is not good, or, I don't have a Trader Joe's. Things could start happening because we've seen it happen in other spaces. And the food justice movement and the health equity movement, I think, is primed to be a part of that if it lives with those neighborhoods and those communities that are being impacted. It can't be led by government.
Got it.
Because the government is we are muted in what we could say. So it would make no sense to really expect us to be the champions of that movement. I think we are, colleagues and we're allies in different ways, but we're not the leaders of those movements. So that's an opportunity.
And that's why it's so important to have this discussion of how do we advance.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.